Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and I am back with another hotly anticipated review, and that is for the HiFiMan EF400 DAC and headphone amplifier all in one unit. HiFiMan graciously sent this to me for review. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation, so all thoughts that you are going to hear are going to be mine alone. Alright, if you are not a subscriber to my channel, please change that. Please like and subscribe and do those things that you normally do to support YouTube channels. And thanks again to all of those who have subscribed. Alright, so I did a first impressions of this guy a handful of weeks ago, and there have been people literally saying they have been waiting with bated breath to hear the full review on this. So here we are. The full review. Alright, so as I said, this is an all-in-one DAC and headphone amplifier. The MSRP on this is $599 US. As of the filming of this video, HiFiMan is doing a summer sale where a bunch of their headphones are marked down significantly, but they are also offering a deal on this where if you buy from them and you bundle it with a headphone that is $299 USD or more, they will knock $100 off of the price of this unit. So check that out if you are interested. So other than that, like, what is it? Let's talk about build and features and all of that kind of thing, because it is an all-in-one DAC and headphone amp. So what this does is in one box, takes the digital audio signal from your PC or your DAP or a streamer or something of that nature, converts it to an analog signal and amplifies it, and then powers headphones. Basically end of list. This is a fairly stripped down unit feature-wise. So here, like looking at the front panel, what we have here from your left to right is we have this knob here, which selects either high or low gain from the amplifier stage, and then whether the DAC is in oversampling or non-oversampling mode. Then we have a 1/4-inch single-ended headphone output and a 3.5 millimeter single-ended headphone output, a 4.4 millimeter Pentacon headphone output, and then a 4-pin balanced XLR headphone output, and then the potentiometer knob right here. And this potentiometer knob, in my opinion, it feels a little cheap. It doesn't feel great. It almost feels a little splashy. It's not. It just feels cheap. Okay. But other than that, we have a very simple, elegant front panel here that I think looks pretty good. Round back. We see that we are rather stripped down here. We have two types of USB input. That does not mean we have two USB inputs. We just have two types of one USB input. So you have to choose either using the full-size USB type. Is that type A? It's either type A or type B. Anyway, full-size USB there, or the type C input right there. The other things that we see here are a balanced dual 3-pin XLR analog output and a balanced RCA single-ended analog output. Now, these are just line outs from the DAC. Okay, they are not pre-outs, so they have a fixed line level output. The volume control on the front has no impact on these inputs. And then we have the power input and a switch. There is a switch on the bottom here to select between 110 volt or 115 volt here in the US and 230 volts basically everywhere else in the world. And boom, that's it. We have discussed the features and the connections of this unit. As I said, it's fairly stripped down. Now, it is fairly heavy. Okay, it has a mass of just over 3 kilograms, and so it's got a fair amount of weight to it. Most of that is going to come from the toroidal transformer that's in here, because this thing has a pretty beefy set power supply in it, and it's a pretty beefy amp. Now, as far as the other build goes in the finish there, we have this nice, brushed aluminum look. I think that might actually be plastic, but it looks like brushed aluminum on the front with this plastic strip here that looks nice, but the rest of it is just in this like matte black painted aluminum casing here. And I don't know if this will show up well here or not, but there, like this finish, this black finish on here scratches off easy. I had a pair of headphones sitting on top of here, just laying down, and then I bumped them a little bit and they just peeled the paint right off here. So like that scratch is pretty easy. Beware of that if that's going to bother you. Okay, So there we go. Now let's talk about like the internals a little bit. I'm gonna set it down because it's, you know, getting a little bit heavy. So the DAC in here uses HiFiMan's Himalaya R2R DAC tech. Okay, so what that is they put a resistor ladder on a chip. All right, so it is an R2R DAC. It's just that the resistor ladders, the resistors are very small, and they are on a single microchip. The approach is somewhat similar. I don't know if it's identical. I doubt it's identical. It is somewhat similar to Schiit's multi-bit approach in that it's R2R on a chip, basically. All right, now as far as decoding options, again, this is a fairly stripped down unit overall. Like HiFiMan is a bit cagey on their website in terms of like what this is able to decode. When I plug this into my computer and I fire up Audirvana tells me that this thing tops out at 24-bit 192 kilohertz PCM files. No DSD, no MQA. So just maxing out at 24-bit 192 kilohertz PCM, which is going to work for the bulk of decoding out there. Okay, if you have 500 SACDs, this may not be for you, but for most people, I think that is going to be sufficient. Okay, if you're a Tidal user and you need MQA, that might be another thing to consider. I am not an MQA user, so that did not affect me at all. All right, the amplifier in here is spec'd to have a maximum output of 4.4 watts per channel. It is a Class AB amplifier. It has a big toroidal transformer in it, so it has a lot of power. It has a pretty big, beefy power supply, and you can feel it in the weight here. Then HiFiMan's website, like when they do brag up on this product and market it, they talk a lot about its use as an amplifier, and they don't talk about the DAC as much. And I gotta say, the amp is fairly impressive. Like, it has handled low efficiency planar magnetic loads really well. It has handled high impedance dynamic headphones quite well, and everything else. Like, okay, the amp in here is pretty impressive. It's not just that it's 4.4 watts maximum output power. It is doing a very good job of power delivery. And so I will talk more about how that translates to the sound when I talk about the sound here in just a moment. All right, some missing features on this unit that I wish that it had that it doesn't, just to get these out of the way quick, is that, again, it's very limited in terms of its inputs. You get one USB input, and that's it. I would like to see an option, and someday in the near future, of a very similar unit that has one or more SPDIF digital inputs on it as well, be they optical, coaxial, or have you know, an I2S input on it, or I2S, however you're supposed to say that. Okay, on it at some point. I would really like to see that, just to be able to have multiple digital sources on it. I also would really like to see an analog input on this thing, because the amplifier in here on its own is pretty compelling from a value standpoint. Like, what it does at its price is quite impressive. We'll get to this in a minute. So it would be nice if there was at least one unbalanced RCA analog input on it, so that you could easily connect up a turntable and then use this as your headphone amp for your digital sources and you know, an analog source like a turntable in there. Like, I don't think you're really going to want to use another DAC, because I think the DAC in here is pretty solid too, which we'll get to in the sound. But it would be nice to have an analog pass-through so that you could truly use this as an all-in-one unit with an analog source like a turntable. Okay, so that's kind of a rundown of the features and what this thing is and what you get for the money in terms and all of that. Let's talk about how it performs. And I'm going to try not to gush too much. Okay, it is no secret that I like HiFiMan gear at this point. I think their headphones, particularly their planars and those big egg-shaped ones, most of them, particularly the new stealth magnet iterations, are the all-around performance leaders at their various price points. I thought the Deva Pro was also an excellent headphone. I thought the HER9 was an interesting idea, and the Himalaya R2R Blue Mini dongle was pretty cool. HiFiMan, in my opinion, has generally been killing it with their sound, and this unit is no exception to that. Where HiFiMan has been struggling lately is in features and ergonomics and usability. Like a few of their headphones, like particularly with that new headband, don't stay on the head very well. Things that are marketed to be on-the-go friendly aren't actually very on-the-go friendly, that sort of thing. This unit, the EF400, sounds spectacular. Okay, it really does. Its price to performance ratio is off the charts good. It's stripped down from a feature standpoint, and it's got a couple of quirks in it that we need to talk about here from a sound standpoint. But when it's working and going, it sounds wonderful. There is magic in this box. Okay, yeah, so let's unpack those layers a little bit. So the sound signature and profile here. It sounds big, detailed, powerful, and fun. Okay, so let's get to all of those here a little bit. So the big part, you get a wide sound stage. You get really, really good imaging and separation, like spatially, like telling where things are and where things are not, both laterally and in the depth dimension for the price. Very good. Okay, it has a it's got a lot of detail in it too for the price. Like it's pulling out a lot of room reverbs, a lot of subtle things. It does bass texturing remarkably well for the price point. Okay, and so forth there. So excellent detail retrieval. It sounds powerful. The amplifier in this thing is really impressive in terms of the amount of control it has for really hard to drive loads here at this price point. This thing handles HiFiMan's own HE6 SEV2 really well. Like prior to this unit, I thought the Lake People G111 was the absolute minimum and the cheapest option that you could get to reasonably power the HE6 SEV2, and that's a $550 unit that is an amplifier only. I thought the K&HA1A Mark II tube amp, and I've reviewed both that and the G111. I'll put links to those reviews in the description. But anyway, the K&HA1A Mark II tube amp at $999 US was getting a little bit better, but that's a $1,000 unit here. What this was able to do for the HE6 SEV2 is it just took control of it. Like great bass presence, good bass texturing, good sound staging and imaging and detail, and it sounded, you get a really good taste of what the HE6 SEV2 is supposed to be. And that's, again, a really inefficient planar magnetic headphone that is really, really hard to drive. This is now the new entry point into being able to reasonably drive that headphone and get a good idea of what makes it tick. So that alone says a lot about just the amp in here and the value that it brings. But every headphone that I threw at this thing, and I threw two low Z dynamics, easy to drive headphones at it. My Focal Radiance and my Fostex TH900 with the Lawton Purple Heart chambers on it. Both sounded great. Okay, I threw high Z dynamics at this. The 300 ohm HD600 and Sennheiser HD600 and HD6XX. Both sounded great. 600 ohm DT880, balanced modded, I should say, sounded great, okay, from the balanced output here. What else did I throw at it? Oh, the other planars, so HE6 SEV2, Audeze LCD2 pre-phaser, even my HiFiMan HE1000 V2 sounded pretty good on here. And let's see, but I also did a lot of testing with the new HiFiMan Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition on here. The point is all of those headphones, which run the gamut of low impedance, easy to drive dynamics, high impedance, hard to drive dynamics, planars that are easy to drive, hard to drive, didn't matter. All of them sounded good. I was really surprised at how good my TH900 Lawton sounded on here, because that thing is as amp picky as all get out, and it was punchy and powerful and detailed, and most importantly, the treble was under a lot of control here. So this thing didn't really care what headphone that I threw at it. It sounded great. It really did. I was very impressed with that. All right. So there you go. Like, it's the amplifier in it is, you know, handles them all. It was really good. Now, does it make the HE1000 V2 sound the best that I've ever heard? Like, is it going to beat my Vio HPA V281? No. Okay. Does it make the HE6 SE V2 sound as good as it possibly can? No. Does it make the TH900 sound as good as it possibly can? No. But does it make them all sound very listenable and enjoyable? Absolutely it does. Okay, it really does. Okay, so then that's the powerful part. It's always in control and all of that. And then fun. This thing is so much fun to listen to. Music is just lively and engaging and just draws me in. It just sucks me in every time. Reviewing this was fun, but it was also a challenge, because times when I was supposed to be paying attention to what it was doing, I would just get distracted by listening to the music and enjoying it, tapping my foot, bobbing my head, and that does not happen with every piece that I review. Okay, so that it happened here says a lot. Okay, now a question of, is it the DAC or the amp that is primarily responsible for that magic sound? And I think the answer is yes. The amplifier, I have a feeling, is pretty transparent. It has the control and the power and the nimbleness, if you will, to drive all of those headphones that I just described, which is impressive in its own right. But I think some of the real magical sound quality also comes from the DAC. Because when I used the balanced outputs here, the analog outputs, and I compared this with a couple of other DACs, I could tell that the DAC was giving it a lot of the fun, magical, spatial character that I'm talking about. A lot of the engagement was coming from the DAC. And you know what? It sounds a lot like the Schiit Bifrost 2. It really does. It is not as detailed. It is not as refined. And it is not quite as tight in its spatial presentation as the Bifrost 2 is. Okay, because when I used this analog output and the Bifrost 2's analog output and switched between them in my Vioelectric HPA V281 amp, I could tell that the Bifrost 2 was comfortably superior in those categories. But the Himalaya R2R DAC in here sounded very similar, very, very similar sonic character, and I think that is a compliment because I really like the Bifrost 2. Okay, so that was going on. Now, this unit as a whole, as a DAC amp, to me is more fun, more engaging, more powerful, okay, and all of that than the Schiit Modius plus Asgard 3 stack. So that's $450 right there, and there have been a lot of DAC amps that have come along that I think, and other stacks, namely from like SMSL and Topping and all that, that have not bested the Modius plus Asgard 3 in terms of listening enjoyment or overall sound quality. This one does. That's saying something. Okay, the amp has more power and control than the Asgard 3. The DAC has a more fun, lively, and more detailed and spatially accurate presentation than the Modius does. So that's not nothing. That is quite an accomplishment, I think, because I really haven't heard that happen before. Okay, so that was a lot of gushing. $600 for this thing from a sonic perspective alone is a remarkable value. It really is. So bravo HiFiMan on that. Where are the buts? Okay, what are the things that you need to be careful of and look out for? All right, as I mentioned, there are some factors here that this thing feels like it was targeted at the $600 price point, and some build corners and some corners were cut to get there. The bulk of that $600 budget just went to sounding amazing, stripped out all of the other features, okay? The only other feature you really get is this oversampling versus non-oversampling switch right here in the two gain stages, basically. So what's the difference here? I preferred non-oversampling. I did prefer the NOS mode. I thought the oversampling mode was just a little bit softer, was not quite as tight or coherent in the spatial presentation, and just sounded a little bit flat and slightly veiled to me in comparison. These are tiny changes. The difference here between the oversampling and non-oversampling modes is not as noticeable or as remarkable as it was on something like a Denafrips Aries 2, for example, where the NOS mode is just way better than oversampling mode, in my opinion. So it's close. I still preferred NOS, and so I did most of my testing with the non-oversampling mode here. So that's like the only kind of tweak feature you get here, though, is like NOS versus oversampling. Okay, that's it. You get the paint finish that scratches easily on here. You get the cheap feeling DAC here. And then you have the only line level outputs, just the one input and so forth. Now, there was another interesting quirk that I found here in my listening, and that is there's sometimes a little bit of like staticky kind of clicking with 44.1 kilohertz files, whether they were 16-bit or 24-bit. There were some occasions when I first started listening to a track, particularly when I was doing the DAC testing and switching back and forth from the EF400 using just the DAC mode and then comparing it to the Bifrost 2, is when I would come back to the EF400 after listening to a track on the Bifrost 2 and play a 44.1 kilohertz file. I would get a little bit of static, particularly at the beginning of the track, that would usually fade after 30 seconds to a minute. So I don't know why that happens. It generally would only do that to me in those settings when I was playing some stuff, paused it, switched to another DAC so that this was not playing anything. So it took, a 3 to 5 minute break or however long that other track was. Then I would come back to this one and play a 44.1 kilohertz file. That's the only time I noticed that static. It was a little weird, but it faded again after 30 seconds to a minute. There are no drivers or anything on on HiFiMan's website, so it's just a plug-and-play driver. I did not see any firmware updates or anything like that, so I don't know if that's a thing that they will address or try that would take care of that. I don't know if that's a flaw in this unit or if that's generally a problem. It's just a thing that I observed. Another thing here is that the R2R DAC chip here, just like most R2R based DAC designs, is that it does need a little bit of warm-up for it to sound its best. This can sound like, I mentioned how great the control of this thing is. The one exception to that would be in the treble when you first start listening to music after it's been sitting unused for a while. Like if it was just sitting unused, even if you leave it powered on, if it's just sitting unused like overnight or something and you come back and you listen in the morning and you plug in, there's a little bit of treble sharpness initially that fades after 5 to 8-ish minutes of listening. That I have noticed before on any like resistor ladder kind of DAC design is they do require some warm up. Resistor values change as they get hotter. So, and they will be designed to run hot, to run after some use. So that happens here too. So anytime I did comparisons, I had to remember to let just a few tracks play first before I did any comparisons, so I would make sure to do that. And then I would notice that weird staticky thing with only the 44.1 kilohertz files. Okay. I think that's it as far as the yeah buts go. Overall, I still think this is a really cool unit. that it is able to drive such a wide variety of headphones and do it for $600 and give you a pretty nice DAC to go with it, to me is really cool. With this unit, HiFiMan has firmly planted their flag that they are now in the mid-fi source gear game too. Okay, so they are not just a headphone company. If they're going to crank out source gear products like this, they're going to have a much more diverse portfolio and be an even bigger player in the market than they already are. This is really impressive, I think. It is not without its flaws. It does have a stripped down feature set. So I think there could be a place for like a $700, $750-ish like EF400 or whatever that gives you at least one more digital input, gives you an analog input, maybe allows for these outputs here to be a variable level, right, and so forth. That's good. Oh, one more thing before I forget. This thing is best when used balanced. And I noticed this whether using the line outputs or the headphone outputs. It is designed as a fully balanced unit. It is a fully balanced unit. It performs noticeably better from its balanced outputs, either from the DAC or from the headphone amp. I noticed that the staging and the detail and all of that takes a hit when using the single edited outputs, either from the headphone amp part or from the DAC output. So keep that in mind too. But none of that changes what I was just saying in terms of really remarkable unit. For, you know, another couple $100, not even a couple hundred, another $150 if they could add in those changes I just talked about having at least one more digital input, an analog pass-through input, and variable output level from the DAC there, and like this could be just an even more remarkable product at that point. But as it is, if it fits your needs, you only need the one USB digital input and you are not worried about DSD and you are not worried about MQA, and particularly if you have hard to drive planars like that HE6SE V2, which Adorama insists on selling for $500 every few months, really, really compelling option. Really is. All right. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the HiFiMan EF400 DAC amp. Thank you for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.